Welcome back to day 2 of the Grant Writing for Every Occasion workshop, sponsored by YSHRAB through funding provided by the NHPRC, the Wyoming State Archives, and the Wyoming State Library. My name is Sarah Davis, and I serve as the Wyoming State Archivist and the YSHRAB Coordinator. I will be moderating the sessions for today, so please feel free to send me a direct chat message or drop your messages in the chat box over to the right. We are on our last formal session of the day, session 6, conversation with Dan Stokes. Dan will be discussing identifying appropriate federal grant programs and creating applications tailored to particular programs. Please be sure to join us at 12:30 for an open discussion with Susan, Mark, and Dan Stokes, our presenters for this workshop. At the end of the workshop, we will be sending an email with links to access the recorded workshop sessions, a resources folder that includes presentation slides and additional resources, and a link to a survey to provide us feedback on the event and to help us put together future programming. Again, this workshop is brought to you by the Wyoming State Historical Records Advisory Board and the Wyoming State Library. Is supported in part by an award from YSHRAB through funding through the National Historic Publications and Records Commission, a division of the National Archives and Records Administration. The YSHRAB program is administered by the Wyoming State Archives, which is part of the Department of State Parks and Cultural Resources. Our presenter for session 6 is Dan Stokes. Dan Stokes is the Director of State Programs at the NHPRC. His specializations include state and local government records, Native American records and projects, architectural records, and consultant grants. He began working for the NHPRC in 1987 and became the Director of State Programs in 2009. He is responsible for the State Board Grant Program and the Archives Collaboratives Grant Program. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you. You may see me be sideways sometimes and forward sometimes. The camera is on the laptop, but the better screen is not the laptop. So if you see me turning back and forth, that's what's going on there. Okay, so I'm going to actually be expanding on a few areas that Susan talked about yesterday as we talk about federal grants. As she mentioned, there are two areas, two websites that you'll need to be able to use in order to access federal funding. One is the grants.gov website. This is where you will submit your application. But it's also a resource for you to find funding sources. If you go to grants.gov, you'll see that there are about 450 funding opportunities, and you will not want to be looking through all of those. So fortunately, they do have a series of fields that you can fill in to determine what areas you might want to be most interested in. For example, the National Archives, you can click on that name and get all of the grants that are offered from the National Archives, most of which are from the NHPRC. This helps you not have to look for, Defense Department grant announcements about, aircraft carriers or whatever that you may not want to have to fund, but you can find humanities types projects. The other that was mentioned is sam.gov, and SAM does not stand for Uncle Sam. It stands for Systems for Award Management. Now, what that means is that you will need to register in SAM with your, what is now called the unique entity identifier. You used to be identified by a DUNS number, but that's no longer being used. So you need this UEI now. SAM is also what is used to make payments to you. You do not get a government check just like your tax refund or your Social Security. You no longer get a check in the mail, but you would request funding and then it would be transferred into whatever account is listed there. Now, one thing that you do have to note is that the unique identifier may be for somebody else than you. You may be using someone else's. For example, like for North Carolina, if we give the State Archives of North Carolina a grant, it doesn't go to them. It goes to officially the North Carolina Department of Cultural Resources, because that's who belongs to the identifier. So if you are not linked to your identifier, you want to make sure that the entity that will be is willing to accept the grant. They don't have to administer it, they don't have to spend it, but they will be the awardee for the grant. So you have to make sure that you've taken care of that. So as you were advised, it's good to actually just get registered in both of those just now, this afternoon when you're done with this. Just go and register in these two places and you'll be all set, because you never know when you might find a grant opportunity with a deadline that's like 2 months away, and you may not have time to get registered so that you can submit all of your paperwork. So it's good to just be set up in there, and you may already be. You can contact other people. If you're from a larger agency, they may already have this all set up and you don't even have to worry about it. You will have to worry about the fact that these registrations expire, and so you will have to make sure that they don't expire at any time in the future when your grant would be active. So they don't have to just be active at that moment. They have to be active during the time of your grant. So that's kind of a lot of bureaucratic stuff to deal with before you've even looked at a funding agency. So as I said, if you go to grants.gov and you type in humanities or archives or history, NHPRC or NARA, National Archives and Records Administration, will pop up. And you will see a few grants that aren't related to us, but most of them are for NHPRC. Other areas that you'll want to look at are the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Institute for Museum and Library Services. Their grant opportunities will pop up. With NHPRC, you'll see 5 or 6. With NEH, you'll see 20 or 30. With IMLS, you'll see 90 or 100 or 120. They often have a lot of different opportunities available. You may, instead of searching through there, just go to websites, the nhprc.gov, NEH.gov, IMLS.gov, and look at their grant opportunities on their websites. For those agencies like NEH that have a lot of grant opportunities, what you might need to do is find the division within NEH that seems to match what you want to do, and then contact someone in that office and say, I'm not sure, here's my program, I'm not sure. So what I do recommend that you look at them thoroughly and then say, well, that doesn't apply to me. I'm not that type, because they may say, oh, if you are a college, do this. If you are a historic society, do that. Get rid of the information you don't need, and that will help shorten it, and you won't have this 30-page behemoth to have to deal with. Or if it says for projects involving textiles, put this information in. Just delete that, and then usually that will get you down to about 5 or 10 pages that actually applies to you. So if you kind of get rid of that extraneous material, that can often help it not look so daunting.
We have one question, Dan.
Yeah.
Kathy is asking, said that you mentioned a unique number. What was the other one?
Oh, we used to use the DUNS number,
Mm-hmm.
but that's no longer used. That's basically every business and entity had to have one of those, but the DUNS number is no longer used.
I do have another question as well.
Yeah.
Corey asked, where would be the best place for a city to apply for grants? They are not a 501c3, but something else.
Most grant programs, I will even say nearly all grant programs, are open to nonprofits, local and state governments, colleges and universities, basically anybody who is a non-profit, who is not a for-profit entity. So local governments can apply the same places as everybody else. You're considered in that not for-profit entity. You don't have to be a 501c3, but you just have to be an. So if you were a college that was a for-profit college, you could not apply. But as long as you are not a for-profit entity, it's fine to apply.
Sorry.
So everything is for you.
I am so sorry. Just one more question.
Yeah.
If the DUNS number is no longer required, is there another business identifier that is required?
Just the unique identifier. That's all it's used now.
I think we're good for questions, sir.
Okay. Yeah, keep asking them as we go along so that they're in reference. These announcements, they include, information like deadlines and when projects can start. Now, if you look at that deadline date when you have to submit the application and that date when your project can start, at the federal level, they seem really wide. It seems like an awfully long time between the two. And that's the speed of the federal government. So it may often be 6, 8, 9 months between the time you apply.
I did see a question in the chat box.
I can't recall off the top of my head how to get the UEI, but there should be information on grants.gov on how to get that. So it's either through grants.gov or through SAM, and I'm not sure which, but one of those two sites. Okay, thank you, Kate. It is SAM. So sam.gov is where you get your UEI.
Great, Tia. Thanks for your help.
Yeah, for those watching the recording, Tia said when you go to sam.gov, there's a pop-up right away that explains the UEI. And I suspect grants.gov has a lot of training videos. They might have a how to get a UEI. One of the things about federal grants that's a real advantage as you're researching, as I know Institute of Museum and Library Services, you can go search for grants that have been awarded. So that gives you an idea of what they're looking for, what kind of things they award. So that's really helpful. And I don't know about other agencies, but IMLS often has the opportunity to submit a grant proposal draft in advance for review.
Eliza asks, what do you mean by submit in advance before the RFP?
No, this would be after the RFP, but sometimes you will see an RFP that says that you can submit a draft like a month in advance of when the actual grant deadline is and get some feedback on it. So I know our State Arts Council does that too. So if you have that opportunity, it's a really good opportunity because then they can address the weaknesses and you can go back and see if you can fix them, rethink, revise to address any weaknesses they point out. So it would be something that's in the RFP.
Eliza asks, do you have any suggestions on how you keep info on hand to be ready for a grant?
A big, big file. And it's like, do not procrastinate. What you want to do is, as soon as you see that RFP, look at what's required. And in some of the slides and in the resources folder, there's a longer list of things to keep on hand. And you want those, make yourself a file in advance. Some of the more common attachments are for nonprofits, your 501c3 letter, financials, if you have any audit results, key staff. So there's a lot of things that are fairly standard attachments that you'll want to keep on hand at all times. So yeah, just make yourself a big file.
So these for smaller institutions. Now, NEH is a humanities agency, so they are much broader than the NHPRC, which focuses on records and archives. So for them, if you have projects involving books and journals and archives and manuscripts, prints, photographs, moving images, sound recordings, architectural record, everything you can imagine, furniture, artifacts, you can use these. Like I said, it's up to $10,000 for the projects. Now, as Susan mentioned, they do have a 1-hour video tied to the announcement, so you can find out how to apply and what they're looking for, especially, and other information that will be helpful. They also include in their announcements samples, so you don't have to request samples like the old times. You can find them on the website. They have one here from the Chicago Film Archive for digital preservation planning, from the city of Boston. See, that's why I was thinking this isn't really small, because we've given a grant to the city of Boston, and it's pretty big, to purchase preservation furniture and supplies, and to Spelman College for a general preservation assessment and training. Now, as you can figure from this, for $10,000, it's pretty basic work. It may involve training, consultants, things like that. So this is not for major projects that will get a lot of work done. It's really for just getting started with things. Another thing you'll see in these announcements is they actually provide you with information on your chances of success. This program has what's called a 39% funding ratio, which means 39% of all the applications they receive in this program get funded. Now, you may want to look at different programs and say, oh, well, that's pretty low. I can might have a good chance of getting funding. If you see a funding ratio of 9%, only 9% get funding, you might say, that's really not worth my time. I think I will look elsewhere. So this one is actually pretty high. 39% is pretty high. Ours is a little higher for some of our programs. But to be able to fund more than a third, that's pretty good. So this is a good starter program to deal with. And you would be allowed to have multiple grants. Let's say $10,000 won't cover all of your holdings. Maybe you get started with your records, or with your library materials, or with your artifacts, or with something, and just get started, and then apply for another one and deal with something else.
Dan, 1 second. We have one question. Charlene asked, what program are you talking about currently?
So this is the preservation assistance grants for smaller institutions from NIH. Okay. So this asks not too many problematic questions. They're pretty easy because every proposal, every grant that you apply for will ask, please provide this information. So this is pretty basic. It's what activities would you like the grant to support? Well, that's nice and simple. What is the content and size of the collections? Now, when you see something like that, it's important to use proper measurements. If it's archival records, they're going to want to see linear feet, cubic feet, items, number of photographs, things like that. Don't say, we have boxes and boxes of stuff, which I have actually seen. Or in square feet, saying, oh, our storage is 36 square feet. That's the area of the storage. That's not the area of your materials. So we have 37 costumes. We have 32 linear feet of documents. Use appropriate measures for the types of materials. How are they used? How are these materials used? Don't be scared off by that if yours aren't actually being used. If they are being used, let them know. Say, this scholar used this collection when he wrote this book, or a museum came by and looked at our textile collections, or whatever works for you. But you will need to be able to say, if they aren't used, say, well, they're not used because they're not conserved, they're not stored properly, we can't really let people use them. But once we finish this project, they'll be useful by a lot of folks who will be interested in doing this type of work. So don't worry if you can't say that they're currently being used. You can say part of the project is to get them so that they're being used. What is the nature and mission of your institution? That was mentioned yesterday. Have you had a conservation assessment? Once again, don't get worried and say, oh my gosh, they want me to have this. That's not what the question means. The question means, have you had one? And if you haven't, hopefully you're asking money for one. So just let them know we haven't had one. That's the purpose of the grant. We hope to have an assessment. Then we have, what is the importance of this project to your institution? So that's one reason why when you start to look for funding, look for the most important work that needs to be done. So you could say, this was identified as a highest priority for us because for these reasons. Not, this seemed like the easiest thing to describe in an application. That won't be quite as useful. So as you do look at what you have to do and where you need funding, do some prioritizing and say, well, these are the most important things, and the reasons why is this, and that could be used in your grant application so that you can let people know why things are important. So that's the preservation assistance for grants for smaller institutions. Once again, I'll have this all kind of put together for you to read. Now, after you've done this, or maybe if you're beyond this stage, maybe you've already done some of these projects and you don't need to do that anymore, you can move on to two other type of programs. These are also NIH. Sustaining cultural heritage collections. This is where the larger funds are available. Now, this program, similar to other programs, has both planning funding and implementation funding. So the first thing you'll need to do is determine where you are. The tendency might be to say, oh, we can get up to $350,000 for implementation. Let's go for that. However, if you have not done the planning, that's not going to work out for you. So when you see a grant announcement that has both planning and implementation, it's a good idea to look at the planning side of it first. If you say, yeah, we've done those things, we're ready for implementation. And if you read those things and say, oh, we haven't done any of that, then you could look and apply for the planning money. This does, of course, mean more and more time, and you really have to just think in year. When you think about funding projects, multiple projects, there will be years involved rather than months or weeks, but that's just how you have to think of things. It's going to take us time.
I have one question. Would any of the grants be eligible for newspapers, like the NIH smaller grant that you were just talking about?
Actually, I believe NIH prefers to fund newspaper work through its newspaper program, which is obviously limited to newspapers only. So I think newspapers don't, because they're different. I'm going to double check that because I don't think I remember seeing that. Yeah, I think they want everything related to newspapers to come through the newspaper program. So when you go online to NIH, go ahead and look for the National Newspaper Program. Now, a year or two ago, they actually expanded the dates that program covers. So if you may have used it in the past, they've extended the time period forward by a few decades so that people can now start to do more recent newspapers. But that program, I think, is where they try to funnel all of their newspaper projects. And there it is for your edification right there. So the Sustaining Cultural Heritage Collections program helps cultural institutions meet the complex challenge of preserving large and diverse holdings of humanities materials by supporting conservation measures. So this program focuses specifically on conservation activities. I'll mention another program that deals with arranging, processing collections. And once again, because this is a humanities organization, books and manuscripts, photos, sound recording, art, the whole basketful is available. And once again, anybody who is not a for-profit can apply for this. Now, this one also has a nice video for you to look at. It also has sample applications. For example, the University of Arizona for a planning grant did planning for sustainable preservation of at-risk film. And for an implementation grant, the University of Kansas improved their energy efficiency of their collection storage area. So this has a lot of different project types, but it all focuses on preservation. So for planning projects, there are many opportunities. You can evaluate environmental parameters, look at low energy alternatives to what you're using, conduct a risk assessment to improve your resilience after a disaster, if you had a hurricane or a flood or winter, which seems to be enough of a damaging entity. Now, NIH and most programs are non-construction. So this means that if you do use this program to do some remodeling or install new energy efficient systems or heating or air conditioning or whatever like that, the systems would be paid for with a grant, but the grant could not pay for any construction costs. Like if you had to tear out walls and rebuild part of your building, or it cannot be used to pay for equipment that'll be in a new building because it can't be part of a construction project. So if you're building a new building, you can't use this money. If you are looking to just put in a new system, that's appropriate. And of course, basic remodeling, like, well, in order to install this thing, we had to drill a hole in the wall to put the pipe through. That would be covered by the grant. But it wouldn't be, well, as long as we're at it, why don't we tear down these 4 walls and put up something else here? It would not cover that kind of construction. I think Susan mentioned that. It's very hard to find money for construction anywhere, even with foundation funding. So it's basically for equipment costs and things like that, and not for construction. So the third program, so that was the big program focused on conservation, humanities collections and reference resources, is the large program for processing and preserving collections. So conservation tends to mean one thing and preservation is another. Conservation tends to mean an active activity that goes on, whereas preservation would be like putting things in boxes, putting things in an appropriate storage area. So those are slightly different. Now, just to confuse you, this program, instead of saying planning and implementation, they say foundation and implementation. But the foundation grants are planning grants. They just thought, let's show them that the federal government can still be very bureaucratic and unconventional. So this program also has planning at $50,000 and implementation of $350,000. And once again, do not be goaded into applying for implementation until you have done the planning that needs to be done. Now, for some reason, also, this program didn't want to give you a video, so you're on your own with this one. They do have sample applications. So this program, let me go back here. No, let's keep it there. Once again, any type of materials you want to have are eligible for this one. And this is more about, like I said, processing. So under the foundation planning grants, a museum received money to plan a digitization project. Some people who have not done digitization before or not on an archival level, because people will expect that you are doing digitization for archival projects and not just scanning and throwing something up online. So, proper techniques will be required. So sometimes you need to plan for digitization. This can be, what do we select? What standards are we going to use? Do we need new equipment, or does our current equipment look like it's going to be fine? So things like that. Another Philadelphia Museum of Art built a research portal. So you could do something in which you provide your records online through a specific portal. And then a nice fun project in the implementation, digitizing the P.T. Barnum collection. So P.T. Barnum's collection, whatever that might be, I'm sure it's exciting and fun, is now available. And then another at the University of Southern Mississippi for providing access to the struggle for civil rights in Mississippi. So those are the types of projects that they have. So those are for arranging and describing collections, cataloging print materials, digitizing and formatting collections, and improving access to born digital materials. As we're getting more grants in that area. And developing virtual collections. This could mean where you work with another agency or another institution that maybe has similar records and say, let's put together a virtual collection. We'll put ours up, you put yours up, and we'll have a link so that it's all one big collection. So virtual collections are a possibility as well. Okay, I think I've given NIH enough of a commercial, so we will now talk a little bit about NHPRC. Now, these announcements will tell you, here's the information we need, and there's often a lot of it. So you may, even if you're not ready for a grant anytime soon, you might want to go to some of these announcements, just read them and say, oh, they're going to expect that information. They're going to want me to have done this activity. And then do those as part of your normal routine to kind of get to the position where you are eligible for some of these. So you may want to do some preliminary work to get yourself a grant ready, as we say. Before I move to NHPRC, I want to kind of deal with some budget issues. I was on another call, so I missed the budget presentation that Susan did, so I may be repeating some of these things. Most budgeting is for grants is for new expenses. Most funding agencies don't want to start paying your bills for you. So requesting money for current staff may sometimes be supported, but they prefer not to. They prefer new staff to help you do additional work that you wouldn't be able to do with your current staff. So think about that when you apply for this. Ask for the appropriate amount of money. Don't request more than is suitable for your project. When you sit down and think of the work, make sure the budget matches the work, and reviewers don't say, well, that's just a ridiculous amount of money. Nobody needs to hire an archivist for 2 years to process 12 feet of records. You know, that's just not working. Or why are they ordering $12,000 worth of supplies for 50 feet of records? That's kind of a ridiculous thing. So make sure that your activity and your budget match. Also, grant funding, like I said, would be appropriate to hire someone for a year, for 2 years, to hire, to pay interns. If you're with a university and they don't pay interns, you could use grant funds for that. If you're at a historical society and maybe you never had interns, paying those as well. One thing is to make sure that you compensate them appropriately. We often look at this, and in a few rare instances, we've actually given people more than they asked for to say, you know, is your archivist going to live on a tent out behind the building? Because you're not paying them enough to exist. Sometimes you may even have to pay more for a project archivist than you pay for your actual archivist, because they're taking a temporary assignment and need a little more financial assistance to make sure that the possible gap between their next job, they have a way to support themselves. So you may actually have to pay more than you would another staff member. We do check things like minimum wage for the states, a living wage for the state, and comparable money for people with similar experience in your area. Obviously, a grant from New York City is different from one from Boise, Idaho. But we do look to see what's an appropriate amount of money for what you want in a person to do. So make sure you ask for the appropriate amount of funding. Make sure that the budget and the narrative match, so that, like I said, things like, does the supply budget match the amount of material that's going to be processed? Does it match the type of materials? You asked for Mylar sleeves, but we have no idea why you need Mylar sleeves. So you would have to say things like photographs or items that are particularly delicate will be rehoused. So make sure your narrative and your budget match. For supplies budget, for personnel, make sure if you are asking for 20% time for a staff person, that they're doing the work necessary to take 20% of their time. So I think both of those areas need to match. So if you have for some of you who are larger institutions, if you have another department that might be doing your budget, make sure that these are coordinated. I know sometimes if you happen to be a larger institution, a development office might do the budget for you. Or you may be a small institution and you are the development office, and so you'll do both of them. So that actually is helpful. And then make sure that everything's justified, because the reviewers will say that this is in the budget, but it's not mentioned at all in the application. So make sure that you have provided justification for everything that you're going to do. Now I want to go through at the speed of light 4 NHPRC programs. So these are announcements that are all on nhprc.gov and do different things, but are 4 institutions of all different sizes. It really does, once again, depend on what you're interested in doing. Our big coverall tent program is the Archival Projects program. And this is basically for processing materials, digitizing materials, anything like that. Now you will notice when you look at our grant announcement, there are certain instructions, and it'd be great if you followed them. Many people don't, and they make us groan. So to keep us from groaning, now a groaning staff member does not influence whether or not you get money. You know, if it's a worthy project, we fund it even if you didn't follow the instructions perfectly. But we have instructions that say 12-point type. So we want 12-point type. Don't try to expand your application by doing 8-point type so it can fit in more information. 8.5 by 11-inch paper, which is usually required by grants.gov, so you don't have a choice. Appropriate margins. Don't use the little 1/4-inch margins, and don't use those 2-inch margins to make your application look longer. This is kind of what I learned in kindergarten type of thing. Obey the rules, and please put page numbers, because many people avoid that. I think we're doing better these days than we used to, so that I have to say, well, I don't know what page it is, but this is what it says. So make sure you use page numbers. Now we have something that says your narrative needs to include these sections, and then we list 8 sections: overview, program description, description of collections, things like that. When we say that, we want your application to actually use those 8 categories when you fill it out. This helps us compare applications, because you're all providing, if it's not the same information, it's the same type of information under the same headings. So make sure that you follow any instructions that you see about filling out your application, because it does influence reviewer comments. And I'm not sure if this got mentioned yesterday. All federal grants are reviewed by panels of people who are familiar with the work you're doing. So if you are from the city government, we will ask government archivists to review your application. We won't ask someone who has no experience with that to look at it. And they will comment, he didn't follow these instructions, so that makes it suspect that he'll be able to complete this project successfully, because he doesn't seem to know how to follow instructions. So this finding aid will probably be terrible. So make sure you follow those. So that's our general program. One area that I think was noted yesterday, our applications ask for what are called performance objectives. And these are activities that you will do, and they need to be qualitative. So things like, we will process 150 linear feet of records. We will create an EAD finding aid and post it wherever you're going to post it. Things like that. Things that we can then, say, did you do 150 feet? Yes, no. rather than will process collections. That doesn't provide enough of a quantification. So you'll be asked to do things like that. So be very clear about what you're actually going to be doing in your project. You'll see supplementary material. It says 20 pages. I just finished reviewing a grant that provided me with 120 pages of supplementary material. What we do with that is we look at the first 20 pages and then we stop. So unfortunately, the most important supplementary material was in the half that we didn't look at, or the part that we didn't look at. And that was just, that's how it works. So all these little rules, NIH may say, we don't care how long it is, do anything you want. And so that gives you that option. They, I think, say 11-point type. We say 12. So just follow whatever the instructions are for that. If something is confusing, once again, you said it says here, but it seems to be saying something else. Call us up. Don't call us up. Email us because we won't be there. Email us, and we'll be glad to straighten those out. We are really here to help you do good grant applications. I don't enjoy reading horrible applications. I like reading good ones. And so if I have to talk to you 5, 10, or 15 times till we kind of work out something that makes for a good application, that's fine with me. Because we want you to get money. We have all this money. Congress gives it to us. You know, we can't use it for our own parties or anything. So, you know, we want you to have this money. So we want nice proposals. And that's why we do encourage you to both look at those samples and also, okay, keep track of the clock here, look and also submit drafts. You'll see that some of these programs accept draft applications. Often it's two months or so before the application. I'll share a secret with you. We have a deadline that's 2 months before the deadline, but anytime 2 or 3 weeks before the final deadline is fine, because I do want to give you time to make changes. So do check with any funder and say, you know, I'm not quite done with the draft. I'd rather send you something that's good.
Eliza Wheeler asked, so is it common to submit drafts of grants to funders before the final application? I do know that most granting institutions do allow for a period where you can submit their proposals and they'll provide feedback. Susan, do you have any?
I've seen that pretty much on every federal grant that I've seen, you know, and again, we talked about the relationship with the funder, and that's something that certainly you can reach out to the funder, because sometimes, you know, if it's just a foundation, because they might say yes, you know, get us a draft a month in advance and we'll work with you on it. You know, and even that first contact, it's like, does this align? Is this something that you think will fit with your priorities?
Yeah, and I would say even for, like, we have our YSHRAB grants open right now. I do encourage people to go ahead and contact me beforehand and ask me if it aligns with our grant guidelines. And if it doesn't, me, like most other grantors, would like to provide them with direction to other grants that are better fitted for their project or their proposal.
So like I said, this is our large program, and it's also can do virtual collections and things like that. But people tend to get very creative with this program. Now, one thing you'll need to monitor is at different times, programs will have different emphases. And the NHPRC currently has emphases on collections that center the voices and documents of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And the second emphasis is on the 250th anniversary of the Declaration coming up. Now, some people out west may think, well, we weren't really doing much in 1776, but it's about the principles behind the Declaration of Independence and not documents that relate to the Declaration of Independence or that period. So we have gotten a few applications in that area. So if you think you have collections that kind of document that area, that's another, will put you not in the automatic funding area, but will provide a little emphasis to your project. So paying attention to any program emphases can be important. Now, that doesn't mean make your project, tailor it to the grant announcement, and do a project you don't want to do. But if that is something that works with your collections, then go ahead, and that would be an interesting thing for you to do to address those priority levels.
I think I'm not seeing any additional questions at this time.